Okay, what we're going to do here this afternoon is talk to you about replacing the lock stile on a Monumental stile and rail door. Very simple process. And Tom and I are going to go through this process with you right now. The tools you're going to need is you're going to need a 9/16 deep well socket and a short extension of some kind. And as you can see here, we've got it attached to our screw gun. Okay, if not, then you'll need a ratchet and then possibly a 9/16 end wrench, but I don't think you'll probably need that in the end. So the first thing we want to do is we've got the doors laid out here, and the glass has already been taken out of the door. That's the first thing that's going to happen is the glass taken out. And then we're going to have to take the hinge off the door. It's a continuous hinge. Take the hinge off, and when you take that hinge off, you will notice that Special-Lite has already pre-drilled access holes to the tie rod for the mid panel, and then down here at the bottom for the top of the 10-inch bottom rail. Now, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to drill access holes for the very bottom tie rod, and then you're going to need them to drill it for the top tie rod. The bottom tie rod is about 2.5 inches up from the bottom of the door, and the top tie rod is about 2 13/16, something like that. And what you really got to do is just provide access to that tie rod bolt or nut. If you have to move that hole a little bit one way or the other to miss the mounting holes for the hinge, then okay, that's fine. Just as long as you can get in there with your socket and remove the nuts off the tie rod. Okay, you can see Tom has got the nuts off the tie rod now. He's just going to pick up and dump all the nuts and everything out of the stile. Okay, that's your lock stile. Now you're going to keep that. So now he's just pulling the mid panel off. He's going to pull the bottom 10-inch bottom rail off and the top rail. Okay, now, as you'll see here with the center tie rod, we have placed a nut cert into the stile at that location. So you're going to have to unscrew that tie rod at that location, and then also down at the top tie rod location at the 10-inch bottom rail. You'll have to take that one out also, because you'll have to replace it into the new stile. You're going to have to take the top and bottom tie rod out, but that's a little bit different because there's a big spacer washer on there and then the lock nut on there. Okay? The one thing that I want to make clear to you is the fact that when you put that spacer back in there, you have to put it in so the long side of the spacer here goes in first. And then for down at the bottom, it just turn around the other way and go in from the bottom. So make sure you do that when you're replacing this. Okay? So to get your new stile laid out there, you want to slide the tie rod in there, slide that spacer into place, and then put the nut on the end of the tie rod and thread it through so the tie rod's sticking through that, what, Tom? Half, 3/4 of an inch, something like that?
Yep.
All right. Now you're going to put the tie rod at that center location for the mid panel and screw that in 3/4 or an inch. And then you would have to do the same thing for the top of the mid panel tie rod, and then the bottom tie rod would go in just as the top tie rod does. Okay? Now you'll see here how Tom is sliding these back into place and lining them up with the mortise and tenon joints. And as you'll notice as you're putting this together, you can't do it wrong. It won't fit if you don't get it in there right. It's too precise of a cut there. Now we're placing the top rail into place. Now we're going to line up the tie rods with the holes in the lock stile again. This can get a little bit tricky. It's just time, getting everything lined up, keeping everything held together. Sometimes it is better if you can place a board or have someone hold on to the lock stile, so when you push this together that you've got something to push against. Now you'll see Tom's going to put that spacer block back onto into the tie rod, making sure it's in the correct orientation. Now this can, if you've got little short fingers, this might be an issue, is getting that nut back on there, but you want to just start that nut back on there. Okay, run it on as far as you can with your fingers. Now Tom's going to go down to the bottom and place that tie rod, the spacer, and the nut onto the tie rod. Like I say, the shorter your fingers are, the harder it is to do that. Now what he's going to do is just snug those tie rods up, top and bottom. You see he just reached in there with his offhand and just held the end of that tie rod. He's placed the nut into his deep well socket there. And he's placing the nut on the top tie rod to the 10-inch bottom rail. Okay, now we've got the bottom secured. Now he's going to do the same thing for the mid panel. The only thing is to kind of be careful there, because if your nut drops out of that socket, now you got to pick the door up and let that nut slide all the way down to the end so you can start all over again. So if you're careful there, that should not be a problem. As you can see, he'll reach off there with his offhand. And there you have it. That has been replaced. Now it's just a matter of putting your hinge back on it, setting your glass in place, and rehanging the door. It's just that simple.